Hello. You're probably looking at an image of Mark Edward Ochterman and hopefully listening to some semblance of his voice, reading an excerpt from Parandor from the Hileist. From Karzad, Kivan took a heavy ferry along the coast, among the islands, until he reached Parandor. The sea approach to Parandor came straight on to the docks, and from that moment Kivan oriented himself to that line, the docklands, the high town, and Mount Than, all in a row. He had been worried that he would not be able to manage his duffel as well as his trunk. He had not counted on the carriers' union. Kivan had not even come from the deck to the hold to retrieve his trunk when he was approached by two women about his age with the characteristic baggy caps and striped jackets of carriers. They were friendly, he thought. They were handsome. They persisted and followed him into a stairwell. Got bags? Trunks? We've got a barrow. They displayed their hand truck. How much? Kivan wanted to know. He had learned that much in Karzad City. How much do you have? A trunk and a duffel. Where to? I'm not sure. Where's the closest UP? The two glanced at each other and smiled. No worries, we can take you there, said the darker-haired of the two. She looked like she might have been a Gurma. She even had a stud in her left nostril. Her friend looked like she was from the Jewel Islands, thick, frizzy, almost yellow hair, all of her features wide but well-proportioned. How much? Kivan asked again. To carry, 3. 3? 3 pence, dolt. Where are you from, sailor? No sailor, Kivan said. Obviously, the women laughed. They walked without speaking for a moment. The ferry boat was echoing with hundreds of voices, and Kivan had to slip his way through the press of people coming and going. He reached the baggage claim, found his ticket, checked over his trunk and duffel. Here you go, the dark-haired woman said, plunking down the hand trunk. She and her friend placed the trunk on the barrow. You have the bag? Good. Follow us. They now led the way, weaving through the crowd, and Kivan hurried along behind, fearful that they might abandon him. They left the mouth of the ship and crossed the shaking drawbridge. Solid ground shook beneath Kivan, and he felt for the first time that strange ghosting of the nerves which follows one as one leaves an ocean-borne vessel. The women had rushed ahead, and now Kivan nearly ran to catch up with them. When they had come out of the quarantine, which at Parandor opens by 2 enormous wrought iron gates, the women stopped, set the barrow down, and sat heavily on the trunk. Lord Gyne, the dark-haired woman swore, what's in this trunk? Mostly books. Books, the frizzy-haired woman said. You a reader or a writer? Printer, said Kivan. I hope. You know press work? Some. Looking for work here, then? Kivan nodded. We know the place for you, then, said Dark Hair. She smiled her knowing smile, and Frizzy Hair returned it. But we'll take you over to the barracks first. They hoisted the trunk and were off again, Kivan trotting along beside, or behind, when they squeezed through narrow alleyways. Kivan was beginning to think that they were not leading him to the barracks at all. He could not imagine that the universal provisioners would be so far from the quays. As it happened, the women were not taking him to the barracks at the quays, which was the building beside which they had rested on the trunk. They were taking him to another barracks called the Moors, which was near to a Jaiwa house, the Golden Thumb. They deposited his trunk in the entryway to the barracks and simply walked away, while Kivan stood digging into his jacket pocket for threepence. He signed into the barracks and was assigned a small room on the first floor above the street. There was a sort of garret above that. Dust from the floor above sifted through cracks in the flooring, and the plaster on the walls was chipped and stained, but otherwise the room was sound. It was furnished with a bed frame and mattress and a small desk or bureau and a chair. A large window looked out onto a long street, and a small and high window showed only the brick wall of the next building across a narrow alley. The windows were open, and a light breeze was entering. Summer in Parandor could be sweltering. The bow, the arching ridge of dark red-brown rock, stretches from the docklands back to the docks, and the summer sun beats down on the ridge, and all through the short summer night the rocks pour warmth back into the air. By August, the heat builds to intolerable levels. Those who can flee the city for the coastal parks where the sea wind still blows feebly, those who can flee the city for the coastal parks where the sea wind still blows feebly. Then the rains begin, and the heat breaks with thunderheads sweeping up from band to end along the islands, hurling lightning and walnut-sized hail into the lashing storm surge. The waves crash against the bow, or the bow, break, and sluice back to the sea, but the harbor remains calm. When Kivan came down from Karzad, the summer was just beginning. He set out on the solstice. June in Parandor is as fine as weather ever is there, unless one likes snow, in which case February is the enthusiast's recommendation. In June, the long days are pleasantly warm, sometimes even hot in the afternoon, and it seems as though everyone in the city has abandoned indoor living. Although Parandor has the reputation of being dreary and rainy, and therefore having both a lively entertainment community and a high rate of criminality and suicide, in June, rain is rare. House painters rely on the 7 weeks immediately following the solstice to do all their exterior work for the year, and they always have work. Parandor is one of the most gaudily painted places on the planet. The barracks in which Kivan was housed was painted pink as a fun ham with gray-green trim, perhaps the ugliest combination Kivan had seen, in no way improved by the overall threadbare appearance of the house and the neighborhood. Kivan's window showed the branches of a tree which shaded the street, and a house across the street painted dark blue with bright orange trim. Kivan found this less painfully unattractive than the barracks, and he reflected gratefully that he did not have to look at the exterior of his house when he was inside. He wasn't sure how long he would stay at this house. The carriers who had brought his trunk here and then left without payment had said that they knew where he could find work as a printer, or at least find someone who knew where he could start. The director of the barracks had showed him the barracks kitchen. Only a few people were eating there, although the open doors and windows had tempted countless crane flies and midges to swarm above the tables. Across a muddy field from the barracks, another kitchen was more popular, that of the Golden Thumb. The rear, or kitchen, entrance was within sight and smell of Kivan's new home, and the sights and smells of the Golden Thumb drew him near. The Golden Thumb was a center for activity in the docklands, and Kivan learned at once that almost any sort of business opportunity one could imagine might be fostered there if only one knew which of the many people moving through that house might be useful. Quickly he identified the journeyman printers by their blackened fingers, and he settled in near to them, not wishing to approach too closely and risk the sort of rejections he had had elsewhere. He listened as well as he could over the din and determined that almost all of the printing and bookbinding trade in the city happened on Press Street, which ran parallel to Long Street, the road on which the Golden Thumb was set. He also learned that the business was extremely competitive and that all of the journeymen were looking for work far away. They felt that they were being crowded out by the upcoming apprentices, and some were saying that they would form a new union for journeymen only. Some of this sounded very promising to Kivan, and he went back to the barracks that evening feeling low. None of this sounded very promising to Kivan, and he went back to the barracks that evening feeling low. The next day he worked in the kitchen at the barracks, and although it was not the sort of thing that he would have chosen, he did it well enough. By the end of the day, he was tired from standing on the slippery concrete floor. He was lying on his mattress, almost asleep, when he was wakened by tapping at his door. It was the carriers who had brought his trunk up from the ferry. "We're here to help you find a press job,"